Hi everyone, today we're going to do a little video about brewing with the French press or cafetiere. I have one here which I really like. I think it's quite bright and pretty. It's pretty terrible material for a cafetiere to be made of because it's a bit of a heat sink. So I'm going to rinse it first with some boiling water. A little more, just get it a little hot. And I'm actually going to use that heating water to also preheat this jug here. And that's really one of the points I want to make about brewing the French press, is that you kind of need two vessels. You need the brewer itself to actually brew the coffee in, but then I would always advise having a secondary pot to keep the coffee in once it's brewed. So it's kind of nice to preheat that as well if you're worried about your coffee getting too cold before you drink it. And this is a very slow brew method we're going to advise doing, so it's a good idea to preheat everything as you go. So that's just taking the chill off of it more than anything else. I am going to use quite a lot of water, so it's not too terrible if it's not red hot. But you can also buy like a double-walled cafetiere, which keeps the heat in a bit better than this one does. That's really great. So let's keep our water to preheat that pot. I've already ground 50 grams of coffee because I want to do 750 grams of water. And that's going to be for 2 generous cups, potentially 3 smaller ones, but realistically we're going to lose a little bit of the brewed coffee in this method. Some immersion methods drain really nicely, like the clever that we did before, but we're going to probably leave a little bit of the coffee slurry behind, mainly for the sake of clarity in the resulting brewed coffee. So that's 50 grams, and it's coarser than any brew guide video we've done so far. Not what you would normally see recommended for French press grinds, where they're incredibly flaky and coarse and they just won't really extract super well. So it's still a relatively fine grind, probably around couscous or slightly larger. And I have a timer. First thing I'm going to do is add my water and hit go on the timer, which I've set for 2 minutes to count down. And I want 750 grams of water. Or thereabouts. 753 will do. And it's really, really bubbly and frothy. And I'm not too worried about doing much to it right now. I'm just going to leave it to sit. And I always think about cupping when I brew French press. That's the method we use to evaluate roast quality or green coffee quality when we're considering buying a particular lot of coffee. And it's a very simple method where you just add ground coffee and water into a bowl or a cup, give it a stir after around 4 minutes, and skim any oils on the top, and then we taste it as the grounds settle down. And really that's not a brew method as such, because you're not drinking the cup, you're just extracting and creating a brewed coffee liquor that you can taste with a spoon. So this is going to be a cup of coffee we can drink and not have to worry about silt, but the way I approach it is similar in that we want to let it steep together for a little bit, get a spoon in to make sure any grounds don't stay high and dry and not get involved in the extraction at all. So I'll do that about 2 minutes in this case, and then after another couple of minutes I'm going to plunge. There's some really great brew videos for French press, and they say don't plunge, which is also completely fine if you leave it to sit and you can then pour through it and go across. But I tend to do, just in case I'm pouring right towards the end, this is probably going to save some of the grounds coming up the side of the brewer and falling through this mesh. There are also types of French press you can get which have a rubber gasket seal as well as the mesh filter, which are really great. And you can even, if you were feeling extreme, take this off, cut a piece of paper from your V60 paper or a Chemex paper and put it back in place if you wanted a really, really clean cup. If you just don't get on with French press brew but you don't have anything else in the house, you could do that. So we're coming up to 2 minutes. Let's give it a little stir. And it's incredibly bubbly because there's so much coffee going on and so much water. They've really created a thick cap, so I'm going to give that a good old stir. That's nicely mixed now. I'm going to set the time for another 2 minutes, and then we're going to plunge. Now, what I would also recommend at this point normally is to get 2 spoons and skim off those oils from the top. And I would say do that if you've got people over and you want to get them a cup of coffee relatively quickly and you're using the French press. Do that, maybe then plunge incredibly slowly and you can pour a couple of cups out. But what I'm going to recommend here is don't worry about that, leave it. We're going to plunge after 2 minutes, and then the magic ingredient for this recipe is time. All we're going to do is let it sit. The extraction is relatively finished at this point. There's not going to be a whole lot more infusion from those grounds. What's mostly going to happen is that they're settling at the bottom of this brewer here. We're about at the right strength and extraction we want to be at, but I don't want to drink the brewed coffee yet because it's going to be a little muddy and silty. A lot of those fine particles are going to be floating around in the brew liquid. So that's why I've got this secondary vessel, and I've got some glasses as well to show you how clear the brew is compared to what you might normally associate with French press brewed coffee. So yeah, our magic ingredient is time in this instance. So I wouldn't worry about skimming because as it sits, those oils are going to dissipate. They're not incredibly stable or anything. Kind of like with crema on your espresso, it'll dissipate over time. And if we're going to leave this another sort of 6 minutes or so, it's definitely not going to have any oils on the top of your brewed coffee. So I'll get this in place. See where we're at. 30 seconds or so. So this is something that I imagine a lot of people have at home, and if you've gotten really into specialty coffee and seen what people do in your favourite cafes, it's unlikely they're going to be brewing a French press because it's a relatively slow method. It might be the kind of thing you see at breakfast service in places where the coffee isn't great, so it has a bit of a connotation to it, and it's a relatively forgotten brewer in the specialty circles, kind of like the mocha pot. But in reality, you get a really nice full-bodied cup, and people just don't like to clean them and they don't like the mouthfeel quite often. So hopefully this will be a slightly nicer mouthfeel at least, the way we're going to leave it to clarify. I like to punch super slow. Main reason being, if you give it an aggressive push down, you're going to sort of stir up that sediment layer that's already forming at the bottom. And right at the bottom is the really fine, almost sludgy, silty layer that forms, and that's what's going to make its way into the cup because that'll make its way through even a finely woven mesh filter. So just before I get to the bottom, we're going to stop. And again, we're going to give it another couple of minutes. Slow brew, for sure. I would recommend having some suitably highbrow, flavour-based reading material to hand. Okay, 2 more minutes has passed. Let's take out our preheating water from this guy. This is pretty hot. So if you are worried about losing heat, at least this is now piping hot and gonna keep some of the heat of the brewed coffee in. Just as the stream is beginning to slow and you feel like you're going to start getting some of that sludgy coffee, stop pouring, because that's going to really muddy the rest of this, and it is a little sacrifice we make for better mouthfeel in the French press. It's a bit of a lossy brew method. But this will also now benefit from sitting, so I'll recommend, again, set your timer for 2 minutes and let that clarify even further before we drink it. Get this going. Okay, this should be nicely clear now to drink and decant out. So we're gonna have a taste. What I might do actually is pour some of the remaining coffee from here, just to show you the difference in the clarity that just letting it sit and slowly settle does for the brew. If I go a little fast, you'll see. I mean, it's not a huge amount to have left behind. Maybe I could have been a bit braver. But you can see quite clearly, actually, how this has got a bit more murkiness to it. And even there's a lot less in it, but it looks a lot darker than this already. So it's definitely got some more muddy, silty bits. It's better to see at the bottom, actually. And the reason that people don't like it is it's going to make it harder to taste the coffee. There'll be some degree of it blocking your taste buds, of course, but just the roughness on the tongue is somewhat of a distraction from tasting the flavours in the cup. So it's still super hot. And again, using something like a thin glass, it's not going to take the heat out in the same way that a thick mug might. So again, if you're worried about losing heat by doing a very slow method like this, your choice of what you're going to serve it in will help. And I could have even preheated the cups.